House Minority Leader Ilanna Rubel sits on the Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee, the Health and Welfare Committee, the Judiciary Rules and Administrations Committee, and the Ways and Means Committee. She joins us this week to talk about her major legislative priorities, recently passed budget cuts, and plans for the election. Thank you so much for joining us again, Leader Rubel. The first question I wanted to ask you is, what's the general atmosphere been like this week in the legislature, and what are some of the major bills that have been worked on this week?
Oh, goodness. Well, the atmosphere in the legislature, I think a lot of us are extremely concerned about the budget situation. This is certainly the worst situation we've been in my 12 years in the legislature, with just deep, deep, terrible cuts to every vital service you can think of. So every day, the mood is just kind of, dealing with another facet of society that's, about to get hit badly with a big cut, whether it's cuts to universities or cuts to, healthcare for the disabled, whether it's cuts to mental health, infrastructure, you name it. So that has been it kind of made the mood a bit of a bummer around here, and it's been particularly frustrating for me because it all feels intensely unnecessary, and that this is just a financial crisis of the legislature's own making that could be super easily fixed if they would only let us.
And I know that you mentioned the budget and how that's, had really a big effect on the legislature this week. So this week, Governor Little signed into law the Senate bill that would add an additional 1% budget cut for this fiscal year. And I know you already kind of mentioned that, but can you tell us how that may affect spending and Idahoans in general, and what those cuts may actually look like?
Yeah, and that was also frustrating because he did not need to sign that. He knew exactly how damaging that cut was going to be. He himself has said it, and members of his administration have said that these cuts are going to do long-term structural damage to the state. I think was their own words that they used, and there were enough votes against it. This cut bill barely passed the Senate. It passed on an 18-17 vote. So if he had instead chosen to veto it, which is what we really were hoping he would do, the Senate easily would have sustained his veto, because remember, it takes a two-thirds vote to overturn a veto, and he comfortably had cushion to make sure his veto would have been sustained. But there is hardly a part of Idaho life that isn't going to be hit by these cuts. Part of the cuts are to, for example, the Idaho Digital Learning Academy, which is really how kids in rural schools get access to things like, AP physics and AP calculus and all these classes that they can't really offer in very small schools, but they can offer digitally. That's all cut. Kids going to school, whether you're studying, engineering or nursing, or other areas, they cut the launch program, so that'll be fewer kids that will have access to funds to go on. Just big cuts to those universities. They're going to be cutting entire programs. They are shutting down the College of Innovation and Design. There are going to be wait lists to get into nursing and engineering and other schools because they canceled all the money to build those programs out to accommodate needs. Certainly healthcare. I think the people hit the hardest are going to be people with disabilities. They did deep cuts to home care for people with disabilities, seniors. They cut Meals on Wheels. Again, there is hardly an area of society, if you're young, old, sick, healthy, whatever it is, these cuts are going to hit painfully.
And I know that you mentioned that you sit on the Health and Welfare Committee, and specifically that appropriations bill failed in the Senate, and so it'll have to be reworked by JFAC. What are you hoping that new appropriations bill will look like once it comes out of committee? And what are you hoping? What adjustments are you hoping will be made with that appropriations bill?
Well, I mean, the adjustments that I think are needed and that I want are probably not in the realm of what's likely politically to happen. But across the board, they did one, for example, they did deep rate cuts previously, which are cuts to the amount that they pay people to come look after folks who are on Medicaid. So, for example, if you need in-home nursing care, I work a lot with the disabilities community. I'm trying to get their program restored to get care for severely disabled children. Basically, the current compensation rate for that work, which is skilled work that requires training, is $15 an hour, like $15 an hour, like less than you'd make at Burger King. So they cannot get anybody to come. You can't get somebody to come and do that work, and that's skilled for less than you could make, as I said, at fast food. So I was really hoping that they would restore the reimbursement rates to actually pay an amount that would get somebody to do this work. One of the big things out there is I really want to see restoration of the Assertive Community Treatment Program, or the ACT program, which is a mobile care service for people with very, very serious mental health crises who have been characterized as being, 10 out of 10 on the scale of mental health crisis. That program was terminated for budget reasons, and we've already seen 4 deaths that were avoidable just from the people in that program. So that's a big problem. We need to restore that across the board. Just so many things, but one of my top priorities is restoring the Family Personal Care Services program, which is home assistance care for kids with the most severe disabilities, which has also been eliminated. So I have a long wish list, and I don't know if any of it is going to be met when they hopefully put a little bit of money back into that budget.
And similar to you sitting on the Health and Welfare Committee, you sit on the Judiciary Rules and Administrations Committee. And this week, a bill was introduced there that would, the proposed bill would have ethics committee hearings of the House be made secret. So, can you give us your opinion and your perspective on that proposed bill? And if it comes to the House floor, how you plan on voting?
Yeah, I voted and debated against that bill in committee, just because generally I'm in favor of more transparency rather than less, and particularly when people's elected representatives have been accused of committing an ethical violation. I think if we're going to maintain confidence in our government, I think people are going to want to know what's going on there. And right now we have pretty decent protections in the process where it doesn't become public currently until the committee has already done an investigation and basically substantiated that there's a there, as they say, that it isn't just a frivolous charge, but that there actually is enough reason of concern that they want to proceed further. And that feels like the right balance, frankly, right now that we have. Hey, the initial examination can be secret, but once they've made it far enough to think that it was pretty likely there was an ethical violation, then at that point it comes out into the light, and the people of Idaho get to find out what's going on with their elected representatives. This one would make the entire process secret, which I don't think is really great for confidence in government and for transparency.
And I know we've talked a lot about some proposed bills and some more general events, but what are your main legislative priorities? What have you been working on this session, and what are you hoping to achieve with the remainder of the time left?
Yeah, I've been working on some that look like they are on their way and or have already been signed into law. So I'm excited about that. I sponsored a bill for death benefits for first responders survivors. So there was that horrible instance where those firefighters were murdered on the job in North Idaho, and at least one of the firefighters killed was just short of hitting his retirement date, which meant that because he hadn't actually hit it yet, his widow basically qualified for a negligible amount of assistance for the rest of her life in terms of getting his pension. So we got a bill through that would, beef that up and mean that in the future survivors would, if they're killed in the line of duty, their survivors are entitled to, a reasonable death benefit, even if they didn't hit their full retirement date. So that was a good one. Some other ones we've been working on, some child protective matters. One in particular that I think is almost going to get signed by the governor, but a couple of them. One of them says that when an infant is born to a family where there's already major red flags on abuse, so they've already lost parental rights of other children, or there's been documented, serious abuse of previous children, sometimes children born with drugs in their body or fractured skulls or burn marks, or, we have basically red flags that this may not be a safe home for a child to come into, that we now have passed a directive to the Department of Health and Welfare to get in there quickly and do a wellness check. Not to take the kid away, just to do a wellness check and confirm that it's a safe environment for a newborn. And that arose out of a very sad situation where a newborn died in a situation just like that, where there was no check done on them in time, and the baby died at 12 days old. So that was a good one. And also one saying that there's no required parental visitation, again, where there's been a documented history of abuse and it's deemed not in the child's interest to be left alone on parental visits with a potentially or a known abusive parent. So we've done some good child protective stuff, but really my biggest wish is in the area of budgets and just getting some more funding back for these super necessary programs.
And I know you've talked a lot about your legislative priorities and some major events there, but I wanted to shift the conversation to talk about your potential reelection. So, are you planning on running for reelection? And I know that you are the minority leader in the House and have had a long tenure in the legislature. So, what would you say are your election priorities and also just the priorities of the Democratic Party here in Idaho?
Yeah, I think, certainly I am running again, and I'm likely to win since nobody ran against me. so, so personally, it's looking good for me. But from a bigger perspective, I really, really am going to be working very hard to get some more balance in the legislature. So the current breakdown in the House of Representatives is that there are 9 Democrats to 61 Republicans. So we are 9 out of 70. And I feel that that's, and if it's a shoe were on the other foot, it would probably be just as bad if we had 9 Republicans and 61 Democrats. I think it's just really unhealthy to have that kind of imbalance. You get into some dangerous groupthink and everybody goes along with things and doesn't ask enough questions. And frankly, that's really how we got into the financial crisis we're in, is they just kept passing giant tax cut after giant tax cut and, the private school subsidy vouchers and all of this. And the Democrats kept warning at every stage and said, hey, we can't afford this. This is going to create a budget crisis. And they just got into kind of this circular groupthink where they were like, no, it's going to be fine. Be a good Republican. Vote for all the tax cuts. And they just fed off each other. And even Republicans, and there were a lot of Republicans who were like, ooh, I don't know about this. I think we're going to be broke. But they were kind of whipped into line and told, be a good Republican, fall in line, vote for all these tax cuts. And now we're broke. And I think the state would have been a lot better served if we had a more balanced breakdown and were able to have a real debate where things just weren't rammed through on an super lopsided party basis. So I'm working to try to get Democrats elected all over the state this year, and I think it will be very good. I don't think, I think it'll still be a Republican state, but I think it would be a lot healthier if it were somewhat closer to 50-50.
And I know we've talked a lot about your legislative priorities and your priorities for the upcoming election. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention surrounding the legislative session, with there being just a few weeks left?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is one of the other issues besides the budget that's been really disappointing this session is the ridiculous emphasis on super divisive social issue legislation. Maybe it's to distract from the flaming dumpster fire of our budget, but it's been relentless of just one silly bathroom bill after another, and every ban they can think of to ban people from flying pride flags and criminalize what bathroom you use, and it's just really over the top and very unnecessary and unhelpful to the people of Idaho. I would love to see our state get back to a small government kind of live and let live ethos, as opposed to this super micromanage and get in everybody's face and tell them how to live their lives. I feel like we'd be doing, people want, in my mind, I think people want government to provide necessary services they need that they can't provide themselves, things like roads and public schools and that kind of thing. And they really don't want the government getting into their private lives and telling them what to do. And we're kind of getting the opposite from our government these days. They don't want to provide the basic services, and all they want to do is tell you how to live your life.
What would you say is the best way for your constituents or the everyday Idaho citizen to be involved in the legislative process and in the upcoming elections?
Oh, really good question. I think there are so many possibilities. I mean, when we're in session, writing into your legislator, calling into hearings, most committees will allow you to testify remotely. So if there are issues you care about, you can actually, without having to leave Eastern Idaho, you can pipe in from there and dial into the committee and be heard on committees. But in the election, there are candidates running all over the state, and they need help and volunteers. So reach out to your local candidates and see what you can do for them. And there's a huge range of stuff. They need people to knock doors and stuff envelopes and make calls and weigh in on policy issues and talk to friends and help arrange house parties. I mean, there's whatever is of interest to you, I bet they need it. And this is going to be a really important year. And I think if we're going to ever restore things like care for people with disabilities, that's got to happen at the ballot box. We're going to have to get people elected who care about making sure that there's, meals on wheels for low income seniors and nursing care for, kids with cerebral palsy and that kind of thing. And we're not really getting that right now with the folks running the show. So it might be time to change the people in those seats.
Perfect. And thank you so much again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for running this show and keeping people informed.